Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Pat Metheny, and I've had some requests to feature some music from this legendary icon of jazz and world music. Definitely, Pat Metheny is a monster musician. He's been on the scene since around 1974, and he's the only artist that's won 10 Grammy Awards in 10 different categories. He's actually won over 20 Grammy Awards, I believe, but he's won Grammys in 10 different categories, which is unheard of. He's released over 55 albums in his career. That includes studio and live. But there's no question Pat Metheny is a very prolific and respected master of music, way beyond jazz. I mean, he's worked on so many different albums with so many different people, from Joni Mitchell and Jaco Pastorius and tons of people, the late great Lyle Mays, John Scofield. There's tons of people, and definitely Pat is just a master of music. So just in case you're not really hip to Pat Metheny's music and some of the artists he's worked with, here's an image with some of the artists and musicians that Pat's worked with in his lengthy and very respected career. And this is very impressive. So I've always found it really interesting the variety of instruments that Pat has used over the years and decades. Notoriously he was known for using a Gibson ES-175 in the early days, and then eventually endorsed Ibanez guitars. And they've been making jazz boxes for Pat, for decades now. But think of like the Picasso custom acoustic, early guitar synthesizers, from companies like Roland. He's been playing a lot of baritone, acoustic, steel string and nylon string in recent years. So it's really interesting to notice Pat playing solo, acoustic guitar, instrumental, solo guitar, duo, trio, quartet, quintet, ensembles. Pat's done it all. And he's used a variety of different instruments, while he's been, wearing all these different hats. That's really cool. So the chord-based and rhythm guitar examples in this episode came from 2 Pat Metheny albums, and like I mentioned during the intro, he's released 55 albums. So I'm not even going to pretend like I've gone through all of his releases. He definitely has way more than I realized. I knew Pat had a lot of albums, but I didn't realize he's released 55 albums. But my 2 favorites, definitely Bright Size Life and Pat Metheny Group, and I'm currently trying to track down a copy of Watercolors, his second album, but definitely, I'm hitting some of my favorite Pat Metheny moments. His music is very demanding, very hard, and he's also a very interesting guitarist because some of his songs, when you look at a transcription or a lead sheet, it almost looks like a horn part, single note melodies and lines. Maybe occasionally there's like a double stop or a dyad, and then other songs are just literally filled with chords. So it's kind of confusing to go from one song into the next and notice, one song might just be single note melodies and licks. The next song might be this really intense chord workout. The next song might be a combination of the two or whatever. So you never really know what Pat's going to do until he does it. And that's really impressive and really inspiring too. So anyway, just a heads up. Or with the opening, that was actually the ending of the song Bright Size Life from the album by the same name. It's Pat Metheny's debut with Jaco Pastorius on bass. It's on the wall right there too. That's, I think, my favorite Pat Metheny album. Now, I haven't heard every album he's ever released. I think I mentioned that just a few moments ago. But definitely, out of the albums I've heard thus far, that's my favorite. Pat Metheny Group's great too, and also Watercolors as well. But this is interesting. It's definitely a great sample of this kind of mixture between melodic single note, parts, partial chords, and then also, full chords too. But something like this. This is the ending of the song, keep in mind. Something like that. There we go. But really interesting, very jazzy, of course. It's Pat Metheny. But he's starting with this, right? And then he basically does these double stop slid. That's kind of implying like a G major 7 there. Like that. And then this little booger. Like that. And that's really interesting. it's an implied B flat. It's like a B flat major 7 flat 5, and Pat definitely seems fond of that tonality. It appears in other songs of his. So a B flat major 7 flat 5, and he's doing, let's see, like that, and then this little thing. So you're basically setting up D major, but you're going to actually follow that with a D over C. So you have to play D major, something like that, and you're doing this kind of slip and slide like that. There's the D major, and then basically add a C right there. Right, so D over C. And then right here, like a little part of A7. And then this right here is super tasty. That's a D major 9. And then you hear him strum that chord. And then you hear him do a reverse rake, you know, through the chord. It's real quiet after that. You know, or something like that. Really tasty, lots of textures and tonalities floating around in there, which is typical of Pat's, you know, musical style. And there's just something about that song. It just grabs my attention. Of course, Jocko is just tearing it up on bass. But a cool guitar part, real airy and dreamy. You know, or something like that. Okay, next up is the comping section from the song Unity Village. This is also from the album Bright Size Life, and this is interesting because Pat is comping behind himself. And there's two guitar tracks, one's playing melodies and single note lines, the other one's playing chords. And Pat is a masterful chord comper, but you have to wait until he's playing behind somebody else that's, you know, taking a solo, like maybe Mark Egan, or back when he was working with Lyle Mays or Jaco Pastorius or somebody like that. And when somebody else is soloing, really pay attention and listen to what Pat does. And this part from Unity Village, this is kind of an overview. This example and the next one are both from the same song. But this first part, something like this. Actually starts with this A minor add 9, and then this E sus4 to E major there implied, and right there it's kind of an you know, F major 7, and he keeps opening up that B string, so that'd be like an F major 7 sharp 11 right there, right, and then back to that A minor add 9 again. The E sus4 to E major, and then that F major 7 again, and then right here, that's really cool, like that. So that's going to be like a B flat major 7 sharp 11 implied right there. And I like the way he's adding that part. Tough, but it's really interesting. It's kind of hard to come off that F major 7 and then hop over to that B flat major 7 sharp 11 move. Really interesting, you know, chords happening there. The next example is the next pass of this comping pattern from Unity Village, and it's the same chord progression, but it's modified ever so slightly, like this. So now we're doing A minor add 9, but it's this voicing instead of that one, like that. And then keep the E sus4 to E major. And then that F major 7, and we're still kind of lifting up and grabbing that sharp 11, you know, the open B. the A minor add 9. And then right here, he actually moves to the Hendrix chord, E7 sharp 9. And then he changes it to an implied E7 flat 9. Like that. That's a really cool change. Like that. And then from there, go right back to that F major 7 move again. And then at the end of this one, he grabs this, it's technically a B flat major 7 flat 5. I think I said sharp 11 earlier, but I think that actually is a B flat major 7 flat 5. And he just kind of like plucks his way through it, you know, or something like that. But check that song out, and I know it's going to be hard, but try to ignore the melodic, you know, single note stuff and just listen for Pat's chords in the background. It's really interesting. Okay, next up's a really cool chord pattern from the song Inequity Road. This is also from Bright Size Life. Something like this. But the chords right there is what I'm grabbing. So right here, right, that's so cool. So it's like a B flat minor implied to a A flat 6. And then right there, that's gonna be like a G flat major 7 flat 5 to, you know, G flat major 7. And then G minor right there. You know, real crafty, you know, progression happening there. It right there, so now it's B minor to an A6, and then C sharp minor, and then a B6, and then it's like a B flat 7 sus4 to B flat 7, and then it reverts into like single note melody there, or whatever. But love those chords. Stuff. Okay, here's a comping pattern that happens in Inequity Road, and this is actually behind a Jaco Pastorius bass solo, but this is really cool, like this. You know, something like that. So it actually starts right here, E flat minor, and then this is really tasty, this B6. So I like that change happening there. And then right here, this is really crafty. That's an F sharp over A sharp. So that E flat minor, B6, F sharp over A sharp. And then it's B minor, kind of like what we had earlier. And then right there, that's like E minor over B. And then change that B to a C, now it's just C major. And then right there, that's like G over B. And then you hear this. And that's actually an A add 9 right there at the end. So one more time, kind of moving through those chords. E flat minor, B6, F sharp over A sharp, B minor, and then it's E over B, C major, G over B, and then that A add 9. Really cool, like, series of chords. Okay, last but not least is the opening to the song Phase Dance. This is from the album Pat Metheny Group, which is on the wall right there, and this is arguably Pat Metheny's most famous song. Now, this wasn't a chart-topping hit or anything like that, but this is a very famous and recognizable song. Most people know Phase Dance. And this is interesting because it was actually played on a Nashville-tuned, strung and tuned guitar. That's where you take the top strings out of a 12-string set, and you definitely kind of jack up your tuning. But it creates this really airy and, high-pitched sound. And you can definitely play this part on just a standard, regularly tuned guitar, which is what I'm getting ready to demonstrate. But keep in mind, it was originally played on a Nashville strung and tuned guitar. But the opening, you're basically playing in D at first. Right? So that's kind of playing around with like D major 7 right there. Right? But you're doing it like that. Right? And this chord part is actually really hard to do like solo guitar, because you either have to fret things kind of weird or like maybe use your thumb. But the next chord is basically an implied B minor 7. Now the way I'm playing it right there is not how Pat played it. Pat just did, right? But the bass note behind him, you know, kind of dictates what that chord actually is. You know, a B flat minor 7 implied. Right? Then the next chord, it's this. So that's like a B flat, what, B flat major 7 sharp 11 implied. So that's really tricky, like I said, to kind of play it on one guitar, because you start there. And then to grab those bass notes, that's what makes it really hard. And then right there. Switching back, that's really tough to keep it all together on one guitar. But just keep in mind, Pat technically was just playing the top part of those chords. And then fan of chord progressions and songs like that where a guitar part or a chord part's established, and then it's the root notes below it that change and kind of alter and kind of deliver like these modal tonalities and shifts, you know, in the tonality. Really cool stuff, and that's a classic song right there. Right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the chords of Pat Metheny. Definitely a legendary, monstrous guitarist, and I have to admit, I was very intimidated putting this together. I'd seen requests coming in for Pat Metheny, and I knew this episode was long overdue. And then when I started really kind of wrapping my head around it, I thought, well, 55 albums. I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to show? And then I thought, well, wait, I'm just going to show, you know, some of my personal favorites, songs I remember, you know, kind of locking onto, like back when I was in college and stuff, and really warming up, or trying to warm up to jazz music. Definitely Pat Metheny was a guitarist that helped me open some jazzy doors. You know, other players like Schofield and Scott Henderson and, you know, Mike Stern and people like that. They definitely helped me open those doors too. But with Pat's music, it kind of hit me different. It didn't really sound like jazz to me. You know, younger, when I was like just a atomic punk, you know, rock and roll maniac. When I heard Pat Metheny, it had this melodic, almost theatrical, you know, like cinematic kind of sound, and it sparked things in my imagination. It made me think of like flying or floating, or, you know, and just different things would kind of pop in my head when I'd hear his music. And almost immediately I was like, man, I like this. You know, it's very different. And it just, like I said, it didn't really sound like jazz. And then the next thing I knew, I really fell into jazz. And then I didn't care if it sounded like jazz or not. But, you know, listening back to Pat Metheny, it's like, man, you helped me kind of get really exposed to this world and help me open that big jazzy door, which I'm definitely very thankful for that. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.